They arrived on horseback just as the sun bled into the hills. 3 women, dust-covered and sharp-eyed, riding like they had nothing left to lose and a whole world to hide. The oldest one dismounted first. Her boots hit the dry earth with a sound that was too final for a simple visit. She met the rancher's gaze, and with a smile that didn't touch her eyes, she said something he'd never forget. "We don't snore, mister, but we do make noise." From that moment, nothing on Travis Malone's land would ever be quiet again. The silence he had built around himself for years, a fortress of solitude, was about to be torn down stone by stone. Because these women didn't just bring dust and tired horses, they brought a storm. Travis Malone watched them from his porch. His hand wasn't far from the Colt at his hip, a habit he'd never managed to break. His 38 years had carved lines of caution into his face. He'd learned the hard way that nothing good ever arrived announced by a dust cloud. He was a man who had bought his peace with blood and bone, and he guarded it jealously. The woman who spoke, the oldest, called herself Helena. Her eyes were a startling green, and they looked right through him, weighing and measuring. The second, Clara, leaned against her horse, a smirk playing on her lips. She looked amused by the whole world, and twice as dangerous. The youngest, Isa, stayed back, a frightened fawn caught in the glare of a lantern, her eyes wide and absorbing everything. "We need shelter," Helena stated. It wasn't a request. It was a fact laid bare on the dry Texas air. "Just for the night, water for the horses." Travis grunted, a sound that was more rust than voice. He saw the exhaustion in their bones, but he saw something else, too. A dangerous fire banked low but ready to roar. He wanted them gone. He wanted his silence back. But something in Helena's determined stare, a silent plea buried deep beneath the steel, stopped him. It was a look he recognized, the look of someone cornered. "Barn's empty," he grunted, nodding toward the large, shadowed structure. "Water troughs by the well." He thought that was the end of it. He thought he was just giving shelter to 3 strangers. He had no idea he was opening his door to a reckoning. The supper was a quiet affair. The clinking of forks on tin plates was the only conversation. Travis sat at the head of his small table, watching them over the rim of his cup. Every nerve was on fire. Helena ate slowly, deliberately. Her eyes would flick to his from time to time, a silent challenge. Clara was the opposite. She practically vibrated with a restless energy, her sarcasm a shield. "Not much for conversation, are you, mister?" she drawled, her voice cutting through the tension. "Or is it just our pretty faces that render you speechless?" Travis didn't bite. He just kept cutting his dried beef. Isa, the youngest, barely looked up from her plate, but he saw her darting glances, quick and skittish, like a bird checking for hawks. The air was thick with things unsaid. 1,000 questions hung in the space between them. Later, as darkness swallowed the ranch whole, Travis retreated to his room. The heat of the day lingered, heavy and suffocating. He poured a measure of whiskey, the amber liquid a familiar comfort. He was about to unbutton his shirt when a soft knock echoed through the house. The floorboards creaked. Helena stood in his doorway, barefoot. Her hair was down, a dark river over her shoulders. Her eyes, in the dim lantern light, seemed to glow. She stepped inside, and the small room was suddenly filled with the scent of dust and wild sage and something else. Something untamed. "We don't snore, mister," she repeated, her voice a low murmur that sent a shiver down his spine. "But we make noise." And before he could process the words, before he could raise a hand to stop her, she was on him. Her hands found his shoulders, her body pressed against his. Her lips claimed his, firm and demanding. It wasn't a kiss of passion. It was an invasion, a sudden fierce claiming that ignited a part of him he thought had died in the war. He responded on pure instinct. his arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her closer, the kiss deepening, becoming raw and urgent. The tension that had been simmering all day didn't just break, it exploded. A wildfire of unspoken needs and desperate chances sweeping through the carefully constructed walls of his solitude. Then the door creaked open again. Clara stood there, her eyes glinted with a mischievous, knowing delight. A silent invitation. She moved with a fluid, predatory grace, shedding her clothes as she came closer, her gaze locked on Travis. Her touch was a tease, a provocation, her fingers tracing patterns on his back as she joined the embrace. The air grew thick with a primal hunger that pulsed in the small room. And then came Issa. She entered slowly, hesitantly. Her initial shyness was gone, replaced by a quiet, determined curiosity. Her eyes, no longer frightened, held a burgeoning sensuality. She moved to the bed, her simple dress falling to the floor, revealing the soft curves of her young body. She watched them for a moment, her gaze unwavering, learning. Then, with a soft sigh that was part surrender and part demand, she joined the tangle of limbs, her touch tentative at first, then growing bolder. The old bed frame groaned under their combined weight, a rhythmic protest swallowed by the rough-hewn timbers of the walls. Muffled cries, gasps, the soft sound of skin on skin, a primal symphony playing out in the heart of the desolate ranch. The night was no longer just a passage of time, it was a crucible, and in its fire Travis Malone's world was being reforged into something he would no longer recognize. He thought he understood what making noise meant. He was about to find out he didn't know the half of it. Hours later, the storm passed, leaving a quiet exhaustion in its wake. The three sisters were asleep, tangled in the sheets and in each other's limbs. A tableau of fierce, fragile beauty. Travis lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the scent of them all around him. His mind, which had been a quiet pond for years, was now a raging river. He felt the familiar need to be alone, to think. He slipped out of bed, careful not to wake them, and pulled on his trousers. The floorboards were cool beneath his bare feet. He walked into the main room, the dying embers in the hearth casting long, dancing shadows. He needed to check on their wagon, on their horses. It was an excuse, a way to put distance between himself and the chaos in his bed. He stepped out onto the porch. The night air was cool, a welcome relief. He walked toward the barn, his boots silent in the thick dust. Their horses were fine, munching contentedly on the hay he'd given them. The wagon was old and battered, one wheel looking like it was ready to give up the ghost. He ran a hand along its weathered side, and his fingers brushed against a loose flap of canvas tucked away near the axle. Curiosity, a long-dormant instinct, pricked at him. He lifted the flap. Inside was a small, heavy leather satchel. It was tied shut with a leather thong. He hesitated for only a second. These women had invaded his home, his bed, his very soul. He deserved to know who they were. He untied the thong and opened the bag. His breath caught in his throat. It was full of money, stacks of greenbacks bound with paper strips, and on each strip, clear as day in the moonlight, was a stamp. First National Bank of Blackwater Creek. His blood ran cold. These weren't just desperate women seeking shelter. They were bank robbers. And he, Travis Malone, a man who wanted nothing more than to be left alone by the world, was now harboring fugitives. The line they had spoken took on a new, sinister meaning. We make noise. It wasn't about passion. It was about the sound of a Colt revolver and a bank vault door being blown open. He stood there in the moonlight, the weight of the satchel in his hands feeling like a stack of gravestones. Everything shifted. Their desperation, their fear, Helena's demanding kiss. Was it all an act? A performance to win over a lonely rancher, to secure a safe house while the law scoured the territory for them? He felt like a fool. a pawn in a game he didn't even know he was playing. He put the satchel back, tucking the canvas flap securely in place. He walked back to the house, his mind racing. What was his move? Throw them out now in the middle of the night? Ride for the sheriff in the nearest town, a full day's journey away? Or play along, see how deep this rabbit hole went? He stepped back into his bedroom. The air was still warm with their scent. Issa stirred in her sleep, a soft whimper escaping her lips. She looked so young, so innocent. Could she really be a bank robber? Helena lay on her side, her face serene, a stark contrast to the coiled tension he'd sensed in her. Clara was sprawled on her back, one arm thrown over her head, a picture of careless abandon. He looked at the three of them, and for the first time, he saw them not as women, but as a puzzle. A dangerous, deadly puzzle that had landed on his doorstep, and he realized with a grim certainty that he couldn't just walk away. He was in it now. Whether he liked it or not, Travis Malone was part of their noise. The first pale tendrils of dawn crept through the window, painting the room in soft gray light. Travis hadn't slept a wink. He lay perfectly still, Isa's warm form nestled against his chest, her breath a soft whisper on his skin. His world had been turned upside down twice in less than 12 hours, first by a torrent of unexpected passion, and then by the cold, hard reality of stolen money. He felt a strange, protective urge toward Isa, this girl-woman who seemed so fragile, and it warred with the cold voice of reason telling him she was a criminal. The smell of coffee began to drift in from the kitchen. Clara was up, practical, efficient Clara, already moving on with the day as if nothing had happened, as if they hadn't turned his life into a tinderbox waiting for a spark. Helena stirred, her green eyes blinking open. They met his across the bed. There was something in her gaze, something unreadable. A flicker of vulnerability? Or was it just a trick of the light? She gave him a small, tired smile. They gathered around the small wooden table a few minutes later. The morning light was stronger now, and it felt harsh, accusatory. The silence was different from the night before. It was no longer filled with unspoken tension. It was filled with his unspoken knowledge. Helena cleared her throat. Her voice, usually so steady, carried a slight tremor. "Travis," she began, her gaze fixed on her steaming mug, "there's something you need to know." He waited. He kept his face a mask of stone, betraying nothing. Here it comes, he thought. The story. The lie to cover the money. "Our stepfather," she continued, her voice hardening. "His name is Amos Lier. He's why we're on the run." Clara's jaw tightened. Issa flinched, pulling her knees up to her chest. It was a good performance. He had to give them that. Amos was part of the Confederate militia, Helena said, finally meeting his eyes. A desperate plea swam in their depths. A man who thinks he's above the law. He's cruel, obsessive, and he won't stop hunting us. He won't rest until he has us back, or until he's dead. A cold dread settled in Travis's gut. Not for himself, but for the web of lies he was now caught in. Was Amos Lier a real person? Or was he the name of the sheriff from Blackwater Creek, the lawman whose money they had stolen? It all clicked into place. They weren't just running from the law. They were baiting a trap. And his ranch was the location. They needed a man with a gun, a lonely, forgotten soldier who could be swayed by a night of passion into fighting their battle for them. They weren't looking for a safe house. They were looking for a hired gun, and they'd found one for the price of a few kisses and a warm bed. "We can't stay," Helena said, her voice firm, but her eyes begged him to disagree. "Not now. Not with you. He'll come, and he'll bring hell with him. We would only be putting you in danger." It was the final piece of the manipulation. "Tell the lonely man you have to leave to protect him, and the lonely man will do anything to make you stay. It was a cruel, brilliant move, and damn him, it was working. Leave, after the silence of his life had finally been broken? After his house had finally felt like a home, even for a few hours? A fierce, unexpected possessiveness surged through him. He didn't care if they were liars. He didn't care if they were thieves. They were his now, his chaos, his noise. His hand, calloused and scarred, reached across the table and covered Helena's. His voice, when it came, was a low rumble, firm, resolute. No! Helena's eyes widened. Clara's head snapped up. Issa looked at him, bewildered. "You're not leaving," Travis stated, his gaze sweeping over each of them. "None of you." He paused, letting the words sink in. He saw a flicker of triumph in Helena's eyes before she masked it. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "This is my home, and I protect what's mine." The air crackled. The deal was struck. Not with words, but with a shared understanding. He would be their shield. He would be their gun. And they would be his reason. A reason to stop running from the ghosts of his past and face the demons of the present. "Amos Lier may be coming," he said, his eyes locking with Helena's. "But he'll find a hell of his own waiting for him here." The reclusive farmer was gone. The soldier had just been given his orders, and Travis Malone had never felt more alive. The rest of the day was a blur of relentless preparation. The man who had spent years trying to disappear, to become a ghost on his own land, was now fortifying it. Travis moved with a focused intensity that startled the sisters. The quiet, gruff rancher was gone. In his place was a strategist, a soldier. His past, the one he never spoke of, was bubbling to the surface. "The windows are a weak point," he stated, not looking at them. "We need to reinforce them. Thick planks. Now." He hammered boards over the inside of the cabin windows, leaving only small slits to see and shoot through. Each strike of the hammer was a punctuation mark on his decision. He barricaded the heavy oak door with a massive crossbeam. "He'll expect us to be hiding in here," he muttered, more to himself than to them. "This is just the first line of defense. The real fight happens out there." He took them outside. He walked the perimeter of his ranch, his eyes scanning every rock, every dip in the terrain. He dug shallow trenches, just deep enough to conceal a tripwire. He fashioned makeshift caltrops from sharpened nails, scattering them in the tall grass near the likely approaches. "These will slow down horses," he explained, his voice flat and clinical. "Create confusion. Give us an advantage." He went to a locked chest in the corner of his barn, a chest they hadn't noticed before. He opened it. Inside, nestled in oiled cloth, was a collection of weapons that made it clear Travis Malone was no simple farmer. An old but well-maintained Winchester rifle, a Spencer carbine, 2 more Colt revolvers, and boxes upon boxes of ammunition. He was a man who had been waiting for a war, or maybe a man who had never truly left one. He handed the Winchester to Helena. "You ever fired one of these?" She nodded, taking the weapon with a surprising familiarity. "My father taught me." "Good," he grunted. He turned to Clara, handing her the Spencer. "You're a good shot?" Clara's usual smirk was gone, replaced by a grim resolve. "I can hit what I'm aiming at." He showed them how to set up firing lanes, how to use the terrain for cover. He taught them how to move quietly, how to reload under pressure. Issa watched from a distance, her face pale. Travis walked over to her. He knelt down so he was at her eye level. "I need you in the root cellar," he said, his voice softer than they had ever heard it. "Your job is the most important. You'll have the ammunition. You will keep them supplied. Can you do that?" She looked at the guns, at the grim faces of her sisters, and then back at him. She saw something in his eyes. Not pity. Respect. She nodded, a single decisive jerk of her head. The ranch was no longer a quiet refuge. It had been transformed into a fortress, a kill box. As the sun began to set, casting long, bloody shadows across the land, a new kind of silence fell. It wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence of the moment before the storm breaks, the calm before the kill. Travis stood on his porch, cleaning his Colt, the rhythmic click-clack of the mechanism a soothing sound. He felt a presence beside him. It was Helena. "You've done this before," she said. It wasn't a question. He didn't answer. He just kept cleaning his gun. "Who are you, Travis Malone?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He finally stopped, looking up at her. The setting sun caught the scars on his face, making them look like fresh wounds. "I'm the man who's going to keep you alive," he said. His words hung in the air, a solemn vow. But as he looked at her, at the secrets swirling in her green eyes, he couldn't help but wonder. Who was going to keep him alive? Night fell like a shroud. The darkness was absolute, broken only by a sliver of moon that offered little comfort. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind in the dry grass, sounded like an approaching footstep. They took turns on watch. Travis took the first shift, positioned in the hayloft of the barn, the Spencer carbine resting on a bale of hay. From there he could see the entire approach to the ranch. The hours crawled by. The silence stretched his nerves thin. He thought about the money again. The bank in Blackwater Creek. He tried to picture these three women holding up a bank. Helena, with her fierce determination. Clara, with her sharp, sarcastic edge. Even timid Isa. It didn't fit. But the money was real. The danger was real. He was a fool, tangled up in something far bigger than a family dispute. He was an accomplice, a harborer of felons. And yet, he didn't regret his decision. For the first time in years, he had a purpose, a mission. Protect the women, defend the ranch, kill the man named Amos Lier. It was simple. It was brutal. It was a language he understood. He was halfway through his watch when he saw it. A flicker of light, far off in the distance, near the tree line. A campfire. They were here. They weren't waiting for dawn. They were patient. They were professionals. This wasn't some hot-headed stepfather coming to drag his girls home. This was something else entirely. He slipped out of the barn and back to the house, moving like a shadow. He woke Helena and Clara with a gentle shake. "They're here," he whispered, his voice grim. "Camped out by the East Ridge. Looks like 4 or 5 of them." Helena's face was a mask of cold resolve in the darkness. Clara cursed under her breath, a low, vicious sound. "They'll wait for first light," Travis continued. "They'll think we're sleeping. They'll try to rush us." He looked at the two sisters, their faces illuminated by a single, low-burning lantern. The fear was there, but it was buried deep under layers of anger and determination. "Get into position," he ordered. "Helena, you take the attic window. Clara, the front room. Don't fire until I do. Not a sound until then." They nodded, moving to their posts with a practiced efficiency that surprised him once again. He paused at the door to his bedroom. Isa was sleeping, her face untroubled. For a moment, he considered waking her, moving her to the cellar now. No, let her sleep. Let her have a few more hours of peace. The coming dawn would bring enough noise to wake the dead. Travis moved back to his position in the hayloft. The waiting was the hardest part. The minutes stretched into an eternity. He watched the distant campfire, a single malevolent eye staring at him from the darkness. He thought about his past, about the things he had done, the men he had killed. He had come here to escape that life, to wash the blood from his hands. And now here he was, willingly diving back into it. The irony was not lost on him. Just before dawn, the sky began to lighten from black to a deep, bruised purple. The campfire was extinguished. It was time. He saw them then, 4 figures on horseback, emerging from the tree line. They moved slowly, cautiously, their rifles held at the ready, stark silhouettes against the burgeoning light. At their head rode a large man. Even from this distance he radiated an aura of pure menace. Amos Lier. It had to be him. The silence of the morning was shattered by the rhythmic thud of hooves on packed earth, a drumbeat of approaching doom. Travis raised the Spencer to his shoulder, lining up the sights on the lead rider. His finger tightened on the trigger. He was ready. They were ready. The confrontation was no longer a distant threat. It was an inevitable dawn, and Travis Malone was about to meet it head-on. But just as he was about to give the signal to fire, he saw something that made his blood run cold. A 5th rider. This one wasn't with the main group. This one was circling around, using a dry creek bed for cover, heading straight for the back of the house, the unprotected side. They weren't just planning to rush the front. They were flanking him. They knew his defenses. They knew his blind spots. How could they possibly know? It didn't make any sense. Unless someone inside had told them. The thought hit him like a physical blow. A traitor. One of the sisters. His mind raced, replaying every moment since they arrived. Helena, the leader, the planner, the one who had seduced him, who had played him so perfectly. Clara, the wild card, her sarcasm a mask for something deeper. Could her cynicism extend to betrayal? Issa, the innocent. It couldn't be her, could it? He had no time to think. The flanking rider was getting closer. If he reached the back of the house, they were all dead. Travis had a choice to make, and he had to make it in a split second. Warn them and reveal his position, giving the main group a clear shot at him. Or take out the flanking rider himself and leave Helena and Clara to face the frontal assault alone for a few crucial moments. He made his choice. He shifted his aim from the lead rider to the one in the creek bed. He took a deep breath, let it out slow, and squeezed the trigger. The crack of the rifle shot ripped through the morning stillness. It was the first note in a symphony of violence. The flanking rider jerked in his saddle and toppled sideways, his horse rearing in panic. One down. But now all hell was about to break loose. The main group spurred their horses, charging toward the ranch, firing wildly. Bullets thudded into the walls of the barn and the house. Travis ducked down behind the hay bales as splinters flew past his head. He heard the sharp report of the Winchester from the attic. Helena was returning fire. Then the deeper boom of the Spencer from the front room. Clara was in the fight. He risked a peek. Amos and his men had dismounted, using their horses for cover as they advanced. They were smart. They were organized. This was more than a posse. This was a military unit. Travis fired again, taking aim at the second man. The man screamed and went down, clutching his leg. But as he did, Travis saw Amos give a hand signal, not to his men. He was signaling toward the house, to the attic window, to Helena. And Travis watched in stunned horror as a piece of white cloth fluttered from the window for just a second before being pulled back inside. A signal. It wasn't a traitor. It was a trap. They had all been playing him. Helena wasn't fighting them. She was working with them. The seduction, the story of the evil stepfather. It was all a lie. A lie to get him to fortify his ranch, to get him to be the bait in their trap. But a trap for who? They were the bank robbers. Amos was the law. He was fighting on the wrong side. His mind reeled. The betrayal was so complete, so absolute, it almost paralyzed him. He had been played for the ultimate fool. He had turned his home into a fortress to protect the very people who were now trying to kill him. He heard a noise behind him. He spun around, bringing the rifle up. Clara stood there at the top of the hayloft ladder. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a fear he hadn't seen before. "Travis, you have to listen to me," she said, her voice shaking. "It's not what you think." Get out of my way, Clara, he snarled, his voice a low growl. No, Helena. She made a deal with him, a deal to get you out of the way. They're not here for us, they're here for what's buried on your land. Buried on his land? What was she talking about? His mind couldn't process it. She's lying to you, Malone. Amos's voice boomed from outside. She's trying to save her own skin. They're all in it together. Travis was caught in a crossfire of lies, the truth buried somewhere in the middle. Who was he supposed to believe? The woman who had lied to him from the start? Or the woman who was now pointing a gun at him? Because Clara was no longer empty-handed. She had a pistol, and it was aimed directly at his heart. I'm sorry, Travis, she whispered, a tear tracing a clean path through the grime on her cheek. I didn't want this, but he'll kill Issa if I don't. His world narrowed to the muzzle of the pistol in Clara's hand. The battle raging outside faded to a dull roar. What's buried on my land, Clara? He asked, his voice dangerously quiet. She hesitated, her eyes darting from him to the sounds of the fight. The money, she choked out. The bank robbery. It was a distraction. The real score was a payroll shipment. Army gold. Amos was the inside man. He was supposed to hide it, but his partners double-crossed him. They buried it here, on this land, before you even owned it. They were killed before they could tell him where. He's been searching for it for years. It was insane. An impossible story. Army gold, buried on his ranch. And you, Travis pressed, where do you and your sisters fit in? Amos found us, she said, her voice cracking. He knew our father was one of the men who betrayed him. He's been using us, forcing us to help him search. He thought a lonely rancher would be an easy mark. He sent Helena in to soften you up, to get you to trust her so she could search the property without you getting suspicious. The night of passion. It wasn't a seduction. It was an interrogation of a different kind, an attempt to find the limits of his trust. But something went wrong, Clara continued, desperation in her voice. Helena. I think she started to feel something for you. She was going to tell you everything, but Amos got impatient. He decided to take the ranch by force. A bullet splintered the wood next to the ladder. Time's up, Clara, Amos roared from outside. Kill him, or the girl dies. Clara flinched, her eyes wild with panic. He has Issa, she whispered. He took her from the cellar. The blood drained from Travis's face. Issa, the innocent one, the one he had promised to protect. He looked at Clara's trembling hand, at the gun pointed at his chest. He saw the conflict in her eyes, the terror, the regret. She wasn't a killer, but Amos was. In that moment, everything became crystal clear. It didn't matter who was lying. It didn't matter who had betrayed whom. All that mattered was Issa. Do it, Clara, he said, his voice calm, steady. Shoot me. She stared at him, her mouth agape. What? He's watching, Travis said, never taking his eyes off hers. He needs to see you do it, but don't kill me. Put a bullet in my shoulder. Make it look good. It's the only way you'll get close enough to him to save your sister. It was a crazy gamble, a long shot, but it was the only shot they had. Clara's eyes searched his, looking for a trick, a trap. She found none, only a grim, unwavering resolve. Do it now, he hissed. She took a shuddering breath, closed her eyes, and pulled the trigger. The pain was a white-hot explosion in his left shoulder. It threw him backward into the hay. The world tilted, the sounds of the gunfight fading in and out. Through a haze of pain, he saw Clara scrambling down the ladder. He's dead, she screamed, her voice filled with a convincing mix of hysteria and triumph. Malone is dead. The shooting outside tapered off. Travis lay in the hay, fighting to stay conscious. The warm, sticky wetness of blood was spreading across his shirt. He had to move. He couldn't black out. He gritted his teeth, forcing himself to roll onto his good side. He fumbled for the Colt at his hip. His fingers felt thick and clumsy. He heard voices outside the barn. "Good work, girl," Amos's voice grunted. "I knew you had it in you. Where's Helena?" "She's dead," Clara's voice replied, flat and lifeless. "He shot her when she signaled you." A lie. A brilliant, cold-blooded lie. Travis realized Clara's plan. She was isolating Amos, making him think he was the sole victor. "A shame," Amos said, but there was no regret in his voice. "She was the smart one. Now where's the gold?" "I don't know," Clara said. "He never told me." "Don't play games with me, girl," Amos snarled. "You've been living here for days." "I'm not playing," Clara shot back. "But I have an idea where it might be. There's an old storm cellar under the house, a place he never let us go near. The root cellar, where Isa was supposed to be hiding. Clara was leading Amos into a trap, but Isa wasn't there. Amos had her. What was Clara playing at? Travis pushed himself up, his wounded shoulder screaming in protest. He had to get to the house. He had to back her play. He staggered to the hayloft door, peering out. Amos and his two remaining men were heading toward the house. Clara was walking beside them, a gun to her head. Isa was nowhere to be seen. One of the gunmen was holding Isa, using her as a shield. Clara hadn't been lying. Her plan wasn't a trap. It was a desperate, suicidal move to get her sister back. Travis felt a surge of adrenaline cut through the pain. He wasn't going to let her die alone. He checked his Colt. 6 rounds. He looked at the Spencer carbine lying in the hay. 2 rounds left. Not enough. Not against 3 men. His eyes scanned the barn. He needed an advantage, an equalizer. And then he saw it. Hanging on a wooden peg, half hidden by a horse blanket, was an old leather satchel. His satchel. The one he hadn't opened in 10 years. Inside were the tools of his old trade, the tools of a man who used to make a lot of noise. He stumbled over to it, his vision blurring. He ripped it open. His fingers closed around the familiar, cylindrical shape of a stick of dynamite. He worked fast, his hands moving with a memory that transcended the pain. Fuse, blasting cap. He lit a lantern, the flame steady in the dim light of the barn. He had 3 sticks of dynamite. He needed to make them count. He heard them entering the house, the sound of boots on his wooden floor. "Check the cellar," Amos ordered. Travis took a deep breath, the smell of hay and gunpowder filling his lungs. He lit the first fuse. It was short, too short, maybe 5 seconds. He half ran, half stumbled to the hayloft opening. Amos's men were positioned around the front porch. Amos himself was standing by the cellar door, holding Isa in front of him. Clara stood helplessly to the side. Travis didn't hesitate. He threw the first stick. It sailed through the air in a perfect arc, landing squarely on the porch roof, right above the 2 gunmen. They looked up, their faces a mixture of confusion and terror. The explosion was deafening. The porch roof disintegrated into a shower of splinters and dust. The 2 gunmen were thrown backward like rag dolls, their bodies broken and still. Chaos erupted. In that split second of confusion, Travis lit the second fuse. This one was for Amos. But Amos was smart. He was already moving, dragging Isa with him, using her as a shield as he retreated from the house. Clara saw her chance. She launched herself at Amos, not with a gun, but with a primal scream of rage. She clawed at his face, bit his arm, giving Isa the precious seconds she needed to break free. Isa scrambled away, running toward the barn, toward Travis. Amos, enraged, threw Clara off him. He raised his pistol to shoot her in the back. "No!" Travis screamed. He threw the second stick of dynamite. It was a desperate, wild throw. It landed short, rolling to a stop 10 feet from Amos. Amos saw it. He sneered, turning his gun from Clara to the barn, to Travis. He was too far away for a pistol shot. He knew it, but he wasn't too far for the explosion. Clara, seeing the lit fuse, didn't run away. She ran toward it. She dove for the dynamite, a move of pure, selfless instinct. She grabbed the stick and, in one fluid motion, turned and sprinted toward Amos. She was a human missile, a Valkyrie of vengeance. The look on Amos's face was one of pure, unadulterated shock. He fired his pistol once, twice. The bullets hit her, but they didn't stop her. She slammed into him, pushing the hissing stick of dynamite against his chest. "This is for my father," she snarled, her voice a bloody gurgle. Then the world turned white. The force of the blast knocked Travis off his feet. The barn shuddered, dust and debris raining down from the rafters. When the ringing in his ears subsided, he pushed himself up. Where Amos and Clara had been, there was now only a smoking crater, a deep, ugly scar in the earth of his ranch. Isa was huddled at the base of the hayloft ladder, sobbing. Travis slid down, the pain in his shoulder almost forgotten. He knelt beside her, pulling her into a one-armed embrace. She clung to him, her small body shaking uncontrollably. "She's gone," she whispered. "Clara's gone." "She saved you," Travis said, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. "She saved us all." They stayed like that for a long time, the silence broken only by Isa's sobs and the distant crackle of flames from the ruined porch. The battle was over. The noise had finally stopped. But the silence that followed was heavier, more profound than any he had ever known. He looked out at the devastation, at the bodies of the men who had come to destroy him, at the smoking crater that was Clara's grave. He had won. He had protected what was his, but it felt nothing like a victory. Later, as the sun began to set, casting a golden light over the scene of destruction, a new sound reached them, the sound of an approaching wagon. Travis stiffened, his hand instinctively going for his Colt. Isa looked up, her eyes wide with fresh fear. A lone buckboard wagon rolled into view. It was driven by an old man with a long white beard. He pulled the wagon to a stop and looked at the carnage, his expression unreadable. "Heard the commotion from my place a few miles down the creek," the old man said, his voice a gravelly drawl. "Figured I'd come see if anyone needed a preacher or an undertaker. Looks like you need both." Travis didn't say anything. He just watched the old man. The preacher dismounted, his eyes scanning the scene. They stopped on the crater. "Amos Lier finally met his maker," he said, more to himself than to them. "Never thought I'd see the day." "You knew him?" Travis asked, his voice hoarse. "Everyone in this territory knew of Amos," the preacher said, his gaze settling on Travis. "Knew he was a snake, a corrupt lawman who got run out of the army for skimming payrolls. Heard he'd been looking for that lost gold for the better part of a decade. Looks like he finally found it." The preacher nodded toward the crater. Mixed in with the scorched earth and debris were the unmistakable melted remains of gold bars. The dynamite had blown open the shallow grave where the gold had been buried, right where Amos and Clara had made their final stand. The irony was so bitter, it was almost laughable. Amos had found his treasure, and it had cost him his life. It had cost Clara her life. The preacher looked from the gold to Isa, and then to Travis's wounded shoulder. "Looks like you folks have been through a war," he said softly. Travis looked at Isa, at her tear-streaked face. He looked at his ruined ranch. "Yeah," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Something like that." The preacher stayed for 2 days. He helped Travis bury the dead. They put Amos's men in unmarked graves on the far side of the property. For Clara, they built a proper cairn of stones over the crater, a makeshift monument to her sacrifice. Helena was buried beside her. Travis had found her body in the attic, a single bullet hole in her chest. She had died fighting, her Winchester still clutched in her hands. Isa said a few quiet words, her voice trembling but clear. She spoke of her sister's strength, their fire, their desperate search for a life of their own. Travis stood beside her, his arm in a sling, a silent guardian. The preacher also tended to Travis's wound, cleaning it and stitching it with a practiced hand. "You're lucky," he'd said. "An inch to the right, and this would be a funeral, not a first aid session." On the third morning, the preacher prepared to leave. He had loaded the melted, mangled gold into his buckboard. "This belongs to the army," he said, looking at Travis. "I'll see that it gets to the fort. There'll be a reward." "I don't want it," Travis said immediately. The preacher nodded as if he expected that answer. "The girl, then. It could set her up, give her a new start." Travis looked over at Isa. She was sitting on the porch steps, staring out at the horizon. She looked small, lost. "She can have her new start here," Travis said, his voice firm, "if she wants it." The preacher studied him for a long moment. "A man can't outrun his past, son," he said quietly. "Sooner or later you have to turn and face it. Looks like your past finally caught up with you." Travis didn't reply. He just watched as the old man climbed onto his wagon and rode away, taking the last remnants of the bloody affair with him. Silence descended on the ranch once more. But it was a different kind of silence. It wasn't empty. It was filled with ghosts. Travis walked over to the porch and sat down beside Isa. They didn't speak for a long time. The sun was warm on their faces. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the cottonwood tree. "He's gone," Isa said finally, her voice small. "They're all gone." "Not all of them," Travis said, looking at her. She met his gaze. Her eyes, which had held so much fear, now held a quiet, weary strength. "What happens now?" she asked. It was the question that had been hanging in the air between them. Travis thought about his life before they came. The quiet, the solitude, the carefully constructed peace. It was all gone, shattered into a million pieces, and he found that he didn't miss it. "Now," he said, his voice a low rumble, "we start making a different kind of noise." He meant the sound of rebuilding, the sound of hammers and saws, of a new porch being constructed, the sound of a farm coming back to life. But as Isa looked at him, a faint, fragile smile touched her lips for the first time. It was a smile of belonging, of a seed finding fertile ground. It was the smile of a home being born from the ashes. Travis looked out at his land, at the fresh graves and the scars of the battle. The preacher was wrong. His past hadn't caught up with him. He had finally found his future. As the dust settled on the sun-baked plains of 1876, one is left to ponder the enduring echoes of the past within the untamed heart of the American West. Here, where every horizon promised a new beginning, we witnessed lives irrevocably shaped by the very shadows they sought to outrun. For Travis Malone, the quiet solitude of his ranch was a fragile shield against the ghosts of his own making, a testament to the bitter truth that some scars can never truly heal, only be repurposed. And for the Lier sisters, their desperate flight was more than just an escape from a tyrannical past. It was a relentless pursuit of a future where their identities were not defined by the monsters who haunted them, but by their own resilience, their own choices, and their own brutal understanding of freedom. This story compels us to ask, in a world forged by raw will and unforgiving consequence, can true peace ever be found by merely outdistancing one's demons? Or does the very act of survival, the very choices made in the crucible of desperation, forge a new kind of strength, even as old wounds remain? Does the untamed spirit of the West truly offer a blank slate, or merely a larger canvas upon which the indelible marks of violence and profound personal sacrifice are forever etched? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe true redemption is found in peace, or in the courage to face the fight? Let us know what resonated most with you from this tale of grit, survival, and the endless pursuit of a destiny unbound. And if this journey through the Old West captivated your imagination, don't forget to subscribe for more tales from the edge of civilization.